Code, Cantina Cast, Patreon content.
Hello, Patreon members. Welcome back. And welcome back, Lauren.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here once again.
All right, we're going to have a much smoother intro this time because Patreon is so much more informal. It's easier
And we've
to
been
get
practicing.
Started. We have. We spent the last 4 hours, the last 4 days, making sure that we did not screw this up.
We've had rehearsal every day. We've been getting it down.
We have. We joke. No, we didn't. We didn't rehearse at all.
No, we didn't rehearse.
How are you doing? How's your week going?
It's going good. You know, just as always, it's one of those weeks, but I say that every week. So what about
Very
you?
True. Yeah, it's going pretty well. We were talking before we came on air that there's a lot of, like, I'm already starting to get prepared for the way station for Sunday with all of the different news that's coming out. We've got the Ahsoka Media Blitz is really getting fully ramped up now. So we've got Entertainment Weekly. We've got all sorts of things coming out. We've got new publicity stills, so on and so forth. So you want to make sure that you tune in on Sunday for the way station. We'll have it at the normal time, probably at 9 o'clock again. So you'll want to be able to tune into that because we're going to have a whole lot of new stuff, some rumors on Mando 4, things like that. So just, there's going to be a lot of fun. I really like, I'm so glad that we brought the news like into its own space, that it always felt like we were cramming it in just wherever it fit. So I really like that we're able to finally do it and like have the time to like really explore things. And it seems like it's working out pretty well.
Yeah, it's nice to actually get to really have a discussion about it instead of just, you know, mentioning headlines and then having to move on. But it's nice to actually kind of get into it and speculate, especially. So
it was always funny. We always felt bad because we would do this like news type of items and it would take us 15 or 20 minutes to get through it. And then we ended up, of course, having an hour and a half or almost 2 hour long show. But it was really cool to not feel bad about doing news, but also just kind of get right to the content. Although we still fill it with a bunch of nonsense half the time. So I guess we're really good at that part, though. So it's fantastic.
Well, the nonsense is what makes it fun. So
that is very true. And so, and what's really fun is, again, this is a Patreon show, but we want to extend a sincere thank you to all of our Patreon members. We want to welcome Whit back. So Whit rejoined Patreon. So good to have you back, Whit. Good to see your name pop up in the feed. And a special thanks, of course, to our now part of the tribe members, Rob, Mike, Lauren, Dante, Risk, Justin Jackson, Sharkman, Dan, Daz, Isabella, Uncle Leon, Josh, Jacob, Steve, and Reader Reborn. And then our Delusions of Grandeur members, Rod, CJ, and Alex. We do have a few people in the chat, Jeff, Sky, and Stephanie. Hello. Thank you for joining the stream tonight. We really do appreciate it. All right. So tonight, we are jumping back on the short story train, which is my first foray into this with, well, either with you or Albert. I don't think Albert and I did any short stories. You guys did it while I was out. So I'm actually really excited. And I was actually I really enjoyed this story a lot, like a lot more than I thought I would. So
I picked a good one.
you did. Yeah, we had a couple kind of floating out there. And the first one, and I already knew we were looking at a couple, right? Because we wanted to keep it kind of Ahsoka relevant with what's going on with the series. And is there connections or things that we can, gain from it? And we had one initially that was from the Clone Wars short story collection, which I always knew was a little bit probably weaker overall. Like I kind of knew the premise, but these stories from Stories of Jedi and Sith, I hadn't heard a lot about, but I've listened to like 3 or 4 of these now, and I really like them. Like I'm really into these things. I really like these different perspectives, especially when they actually do something. But the one that we're going to talk about tonight is A Jedi's Duty.
Yeah, I really like the Jedi and Sith short story collection as well, because it's like you were saying, like they can really you get details, and you get, like, with the Jedi's Duty specifically, we get a little bit of backstory of things that we've seen, but maybe we didn't really consider before. And so I really love it when it's giving us a new angle like this one does.
And what's really cool about it is that there's been material before, during, and after, and since, and all the things in between that really do, man, they really do just give you a completely different perspective on the characters. And you have more, maybe not, I don't know, it's kind of bordering between empathy and sympathy. depending on the situation, right? And but what I really like about this one is that we were talking about earlier on is that it also informs the Ahsoka character and the things that she takes with her, even so many years later after the Clone Wars. And so I think that's really the really cool thing here is. But why don't you give us a quick summary? Who wrote this thing, and maybe just a generalization about this book and who's the star of this book?
Okay, cool. So yeah, so with this short story collection, like with a lot of the other Star Wars ones, we've got lots of different writers contributing to these. And so this one particularly was written by Karen Strong, and this was published in May of 2022. And a quick little summary of what this is about is, so we're with Barriss during this story, Barriss Offee, and she's a Padawan, and she's having a hard time coping with the Clone Wars. And this story actually takes place right before the mission that we see in season 2 of the Clone Wars, where we meet Barriss for the first time. And before that mission, she was very nervous leading up to it because she's been just having a hard time dealing with the suffering of all of the people around her. Also, just the stress that combat is putting on her as well. And all of this is taking such a toll on her that it is affecting her connection to the Force. And so she's really just trying to keep it together. And one thing that she does in preparation for this mission is she's really trying to think about her duty and kind of trying to think about using her strengths. And she ends up kind of coming to the conclusion that, like, well, if I do this mission well, then that'll help me hopefully end the war sooner. And that'll help me, kind of take away some of the violence. And so that's just kind of how she has to make peace with it during this time. But then right after the story, that's when we pick up and we actually see her carry out the mission with Ahsoka.
Right. Yeah. So what Luminara, her master, ends up giving her a mission for is weapons factory. I think is the name of the episode in the Clone Wars, if I recall right.
Yes.
And so they have to infiltrate a weapons factory. It doesn't really go well, and they end up putting their lives in danger, and they barely escape. But her and Ahsoka get to know each other. And so this book, or this story, actually introduces Ahsoka to Barriss in at least in by name, right? That Anakin's Padawan is Ahsoka Tano. And what I really like about that, just giving a quick introduction, is also that Barriss is looking to connect with somebody else to try to help herself and reconcile. And also, I think it's the idea of camaraderie, right? And when you look at the state of the Jedi, especially with the war breaking out, the trauma that's left in Geonosis, we see this in Rise of the Red Blade with this guy Akaris, of course, too, right? The trauma that we've seen just due to the first battle in Attack of the Clones and the first battle of Geonosis is so lasting on so many Jedi that they really have a difficult time just figuring out how they feel about it, especially the younger Jedi. So it's really, I think it's important that she is actually looking for another Padawan that she might be able to help learn from and see how she is coping. And you had a great point in some of the notes here of like the masters kind of matter, right? We see some masters that do a pretty good job of filling that need for the Padawan. Some distract them, some support them. Some feel like they completely ignore them and abandon them in some ways, at least emotionally, right, and spiritually. Or that you get the dogmatic answer, trust in the Force, which we actually got in this short story. And I just rolled my eyes and was like, good God, not another one.
Well, and she got that from Luminara. And then there's another part where she goes and talks to Tutso, I believe his name is.
Yeah, Tutso Morrow, yeah.
Yeah, and so she really connected with him when she was a youngling, so she wanted to ask him for advice. And he kind of did the same thing. He kind of just gave her more platitudes without actually explaining what they mean or really trying to get deep into the concepts. And so she's just kind of like left on her own with trying to figure it out.
Right. And we talked about, we really do want to get to Rise of the Red Blade at some point, but I think, and we were going to save probably the bigger conversation for that, but I think it's still worth mentioning here is maybe give us a flavor for what the Jedi are struggling with. What is the state of the Jedi at this point when you look at their numbers, the number of masters, some of those things and how that's affecting the various levels of the Jedi Order right now?
Yeah, and so like you mentioned about Rise of the Red Blade, that's part of the reason that this story stood out to me as well, is because it has so much in common with that novel. So for anyone that hasn't read that novel yet, definitely pick it up because it's really got some great stuff in there. And so Rise of the Red Blade touches on this, and the short story does touch on it some as well. Just of course not as deeply because it's a short story.
Sure.
But the state of the Jedi at this time is they are just really spread very, very thin. And the Red Blade really gets deeper into that because we're able to see examples of how there's a lot of Jedi that you can tell would like to be of be of better help to their Padawans, but they don't have the time or the resources or even the people to do so. There's a huge number of Jedi that have just been dying left and right ever since the Battle of Geonosis. So they're short on masters. They ended up making a lot of Padawans knights that weren't ready yet, but they had no choice. And because of this desperation, they've been kind of sending out Padawans wherever they need them without really having much time to consider, is this something that would be an okay thing for this Padawan to do? Like, is this in this Padawan's best interest? There's really no consideration of that at all at this point.
Exactly. I mean, and you made a good point. I mean, the masters are doing the best they can. I think given the circumstances, they're all struggling with what to do with this war, and they're not really equipped for war. And I think where this story really starts to lay the groundwork, as well as Rise of the Red Blade, is you have these ideals of, are the Jedi meant to fight, right? And what does that mean? What does it mean to be a Jedi? What does it mean to be a Jedi in this era? And I flashed Jeff's comment on the screen. He said the Jedi got soft. They would have never been able to take the heat on Dalna. Yeah, so we're lucky there wasn't a leveler running around on Geonosis, in his opinion. Which, I mean, but even with the High Republic, right, you still see this, that the Jedi weren't, at the start of that series in Phase 1, they were not used to fighting, and they had to get used to fighting an opponent that was going to fight dirty, right? And while the Separatists don't necessarily fight super dirty with battle droids, they don't really have a concept of any of that. We're later introduced to morally ambiguous characters that definitely do, with Dooku and Ventress and others, of course. But no, I really like that because it's really important to understand that the Jedi aren't necessarily doing anything wrong in their opinion. They're not behaving in the way that they maybe should in hindsight if they were able to pause and reflect without the pressures of war. And this is why Palpatine's plan is so masterful, right? Is that it basically preoccupies the Jedi so much with defending the Republic. And I think this is a really key differentiating factor with what I think it really matters to Barriss as well throughout this story, as well as what we see later on in the Clone Wars, is that the Jedi are so preoccupied with, we have to defend the Republic, we have to uphold the Republic. That means becoming a warrior when we need to. And those stories come out in this, and they also come out in in those last few episodes of The Wrong Jedi in particular for Ahsoka's story. And so, but is that what it means to be a Jedi? Is that what a Jedi should do, right? And Iskat struggles a little bit with that because she is a warrior. She has this, she feels most at home when she's taking action on things, right? And so it's an interesting kind of dichotomy of what it means to be a Jedi and everyone's opinion on it. Yet they are basically unable to really share those feelings openly without rebuke in a lot of cases.
Yeah, and that was one thing that I noticed a lot as well, is like in this short story, there is a moment where Barriss is reaching out and trying to just like have a real conversation with somebody about this situation and like how difficult it is. And she's not really getting an honest response.
Right.
And so it does make me wonder if more masters were willing to just like have a real hard conversation, then, maybe there wouldn't be so many Padawans that kind of got left behind in terms of their teachings, because their masters were preoccupied. So they just kind of had to figure things out on their own. And also, I mean, it's disappointing as well because like the war was just so extensive that they really didn't have a choice. And in my opinion, it's not like the Jedi were just being heartless or anything like that. It's just that they really didn't have any other option. This was just really the only way for them to keep their head above water, was to just go about things in this way.
Right. It's easy to go back and look at the Jedi and say, you should not have gotten involved in the war. Let the Republic fight their war, and you address everything in between. right? You protect, you give aid, you make sure that anybody who is suffering or threatened, you defend them, but maybe not get involved with the Republic. Now it's much easier said than done because everything this was all orchestrated against them. But we see the same kind of Jedi mentality and same willingness or eagerness to, in some ways, not everybody's eager, but in the High Republic as well. We are so embedded with the Republic, we have similar ideals, but really the Jedi shouldn't. This is where I miss like the we had more of this dynamic in the New Jedi Order book series, right? Because you actually at one point the Jedi, Luke Skywalker actually takes the Jedi and says, "No, no more. We're not a part of the New Republic. We can't do this. We are our own governing body. We are too closely aligned," because it just keeps creating problems over time. And that was a really long story. I've way super oversimplified it. But at some point, he decided that's what we have to do. We do not abide by the morality and by the laws of the Republic while we can help and we can be of service to the Republic. And I think this story really does a lot of that too. We have a job to be of service, right, to our communities, to the galaxy, to the Force. But we don't have to we don't have to, I hate to say bend the knee, but we don't have to bend our will and flex the things that actually have core values to us in defense of the Republic in whatever era you're in. And I think that's something that's easier to see it from our perspective than it is in the moment of these characters. I think that's something that was important to keep in mind.
Yeah, definitely. It's easy to kind of pick apart the way that they did things, but I
Right.
definitely always try to keep in mind like what would be the alternative? There's not
Right.
really one to speak of.
Yeah, and you want to defend what you know, right? And you defend a peaceful state. And generally, the Republic is there to bring prosperity and light to the galaxy, right? They're there to do good, even though it's a political body, right? So in theory, but kind of back to Barriss, I think this character is interesting because by the time we get to her at the very end of the Clone Wars, end of season 5, where Ahsoka leaves the Order, Barriss is a terrorist, right? I mean, so it's a really big. Well, it's not a big leap. It's actually while it's a very concise story, it doesn't take much. They really seed this or sow the seeds really well in this short story to be able to tell you how she's feeling, and you start to really see how uncomfortable she is with war. She does not believe that war is the answer for this. It makes her very uncomfortable when she goes to Geonosis and comes back. Luminara goes out on the missions. She stays back because Luminara knows and other people know that Barriss, this really affected her deeply to where she cannot. She feels so against fighting, and that's not the way that she's called to serve, right? She was kind of a bit of a bookworm, but she went to serve and to do healing. And I think even some of that, just she knew the scars that the Jedi were feeling were internal, they were emotional. The traumatic events were going to reside within them forever. But what I thought was really telling is that she could sense that they had that disquiet within them as well, but they did what was asked of them because that was what the Jedi do. And she could sense it already that this is almost like these are my words, not hers, but this is almost like a poison that's infecting the Jedi because we're forced to do this, or we're compelled to do this. Maybe not forced, we're compelled to do this because we think it's right. But then we're also not given the space and the opportunity to really recover from any of this either. And again, the mastermind of Palpatine is to keep the war fueling, and you just chip away at it over time.
Yeah, and it also kind of gets into like the Jedi are doing what's asked of them, but they're not really thinking about what is actually acceptable to ask of the Jedi. Because I felt like one question that this story had me thinking about was like, okay, it's talking about a Jedi's duty, a Jedi's duty. Well, I mean, what actually is a Jedi's duty? Because it can't just be to just do whatever the government wants.
Right.
But everybody seems to have twisted it to mean that. But Barriss seems to actually, and that's the thing too, is like getting deeper into her character, you do see how like this started off as, I mean, of course she becomes a terrorist later on, but this started off as like, I mean, she was kind of on the right track. Like
Right.
there were some issues, and no, it's really probably not right to be sending Padawans who in a lot of cases are kids. They're not done with their training. It's not really right to be sending them to the front lines of a war. But like,
Yeah. And then
why
not
is
caring for
nobody
them and not caring for them afterwards, right?
right, not getting them the resources that they need, just saying like, "Oh, it's the Jedi's duty, trust the Force." Like, why is it that only the Padawans are like thinking about what like how this is an issue? Like you see this with Barriss, you see it with Iscott from Rise of the Red Blade, and then in a way you kind of see it with Ahsoka eventually where she starts having her own issues down the line. But like you don't really see a lot of masters thinking critically about this, but you do see the Padawans doing that, which I found interesting.
It is. I mean, because the answer is to, and we saw this in Brotherhood, we see this in Rise of the Red Blade. Of course, the answer is to promote the Padawans prematurely to the rank of Jedi Knight because they're short on Jedi Knights and they are literally bleeding masters and knights all over the place, and they're falling like flies, right? So I think you had a quote in the notes though that I think is really telling, and the quote is, "Although she was safe within the walls of the Jedi Temple, she no longer felt fully protected." It's a really poignant statement. Like when you read that, what did how did that make you feel?
Yeah, I mean, it says a lot about how, I mean, she recognizes the authority of the Jedi Temple and she still views it as her home, at least in this story. At this time in her life, she still views it as her home and she's trying to still do what's expected of her. But at the same time, just the suffering that she's having to witness, the stress on her own personal self, all of that, it's, I mean, you used the chipping away term a few minutes ago. It's chipping away at her personally as well because
Right.
she just doesn't feel like she really has anywhere to turn to. She's just kind of fending for herself in terms of trying to be emotionally okay.
Right. And I think it's one of those things of as this goes on, the walls just feel, especially if you feel like you can't be outwardly expressive or voice your concerns in any kind of way. And I think Barriss, Karen Strong really does a great job of framing Barriss that she does want to talk to people, but there's a lot of mistrust developing within the Jedi because even those that she's known for a long time, and like Tutsamara, like she feels like she can speak with him, but then like you said, she gets the platitudes in response, and it just you just all of a sudden know where someone's at, and you're like, okay, I'm just going to shut down because I'm not going to get the answer. I'm not going to get the honest conversation that I feel like I need in order to try to reconcile this and try to help me get through this, right? And help me move forward with it. And so I can understand where when your home doesn't feel like a home anymore, those walls just feel like they close in on you more and more. And the parallels with this story and Iscott Akaris are really striking. I mean, they are like reading both at the same time, especially where I'm at in the book on for Rise of the Red Blade, and then reading this one, I was like, wow, these stories are just so parallel. You can almost see them crossing paths because Iscott is in the temple at this time, probably the exact same time that Barriss is, and so their paths are probably crossing all the time, even if they don't haven't come in direct contact with one another.
Yeah, and the thing that's crazy too is that they have a lot of similarities in their stories, but the two of them are also kind of opposites.
Right.
Barriss wants to be in the library, but is forced to be on the front lines. Iscott wants to be in the front lines, but is forced to be in the library. So it's just their similarities are just highlighting a common issue of not taking the time to actually really work with the Padawans and figure out where they fit best. They're just kind of throwing them wherever they
Right.
feel like without really trying to tailor their recommendations for the student.
Right. And so to kind of lead to where the story leaves off, I mean, we've talked a little bit. I mean, really the story is Barriss's inner thoughts for the most part with a few interactions here and there. But I think where ends up going is that she gets a call from Luminara and she gets summoned and they're having a meeting with Mace Windu and they need to basically go to Geonosis for this special mission. And so Luminara informs Barriss that she needs, like, my Padawan is now going to be back in the field with me and going to accompany me, which of course is a bit of a surprise because it was just, hey, we're going on a mission. It wasn't, in private, even though Luminara does take a moment. I think this is where Luminara is. I think she's trying, but also she's trying to balance the expectations of them, the loyalty to the Republic, because she does touch her on the arm and hold her back. And she prompts her to, like, you have a question. Like what, go ahead and tell me your question. I think Barris does feel comfortable with Luminara. They do. My very first introduction to Barris and Luminara, of course, was in the original Clone Wars series with Gendy Tartakovsky. And it was so striking because they were just perfectly in sync. Everything they did was absolutely perfectly in sync. And so that image is always ingrained in my head with these two characters, that they just know each other so well and that they're just always, perfectly in line with one another. Not just because they're the same species, but just they're just so, everything about them just kind of joins together. But she does take a moment to say, hey, what's going on? Like, what is it? What are your thoughts? And Barris asks her, do we really think that that our efforts here will end the war, or will bring about a quick end to the war? And what I like about this moment is that Luminara actually takes a moment to consider this and actually gives her it wasn't a total BS answer. It was actually a fairly well thought out answer. And I really liked it. And in summary, basically, Luminara says that, I don't know. Everything is very clouded. I don't know. There's a lot of things in motion. But what I do know is if we do this mission and when we succeed, that we are doing good and we are limiting the pain that the separatists and that these weapons factories will inflict upon the galaxy, which in her hopes, in her expectation, is that will positively influence in order to bring a quicker end to the conflict and to the war, right? Now, we all know that doesn't happen. Even though they're successful, there's always something else.
Yeah.
But I do like that she at least took a moment to reconcile and share what her perspective is, and to say, this is what keeps me going to think that I can do it. And that gives Barris enough confidence and enough understanding of saying, okay, this is doable. I can do this. I can get behind that. I'm still uncomfortable, but I can do that. I believe in you and I trust you, right? That trust is still very much there. What did you think of that interaction? Did you think that Luminara really, it seemed genuine to me, but did you have the same kind of feeling? And how do you think Barris really responded and took that conversation?
I do feel like Luminara did give her a real answer. I agree with you on that. Like, I feel like she probably suspected that, like, okay, I need to actually answer this question. I can't just quote something here. So I did feel like it was a genuine answer. And I do think that she was also trying to comfort Barris in a way and tell her something that she felt like would help Barris, like, kind of get the info that she needed to be able to process and be able to step up and do the mission. But even though that moment I do feel was a genuine moment, I in general, a lot of times I just feel like Luminara can be so distant that
That's a
I
good point.
wonder if the genuine answer even really did a lot, if that makes sense. Like,
Yeah.
because when I was rewatching those episodes in the Clone Wars, I mean, I just kept noticing how Luminar is very much just like, she's by the book.
Very rigid, right?
And she's also, like, at one point, she's kind of judgy a little bit of Anakin and Ahsoka's relationship. And that comes across in this story a little bit, too.
Right.
And I was just thinking to myself, I was like, well, at least Ahsoka and Anakin can talk about pretty much anything. I mean, they can get to the bottom of whatever they need to get to the bottom of, So, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, I guess I have mixed emotions about it is what I'm getting at. I feel like it was a real answer, but I'm also kind of like, Luminar just comes across to me as so distant that I wonder how much good it really did.
Yeah, I agree with you too. I think that she recognizes what Barris needs, and I think there's a part of her that wants to, but she is a master and she can control her emotions. And you're right, it does come across. And I think this is one of the unfortunate aspects, is that it's a character that I think has that in her. Like Luminara has that capacity and that ability, but she does have this rigidness, especially out in the field. And I don't know if that's just the war, or maybe it's just really her, and I'm just giving her more credit than she's due. But that rigidity does have a lot more. I mean, it doesn't have any flexibility to it to be able to do it. And granted, she is very critical of Ahsoka and Anakin. I think more of Anakin and his influence on his Padawan, because she disagrees with what that, just generally what they're doing, I think, in general. But most people don't understand Anakin in the first place.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not understand. They just don't approve of his methods because he's pretty reckless most of the time. So learning those for her Padawan. And I think she enjoys Barris as her Padawan. Barris is a very good Padawan. I mean,
yeah.
She's very astute. She's very disciplined. You know, she thinks things through. She's very analytical, like she is on this mission, right? She has to do the analysis to figure out what the right points are into the weapons factory to be most effective, to get in quietly. Of course, it goes to hell, but that's the idea, right? The analysis wasn't the problem. It's just the things you can't foresee are the problem. But I do like that, Barris is a good compliment. But I think this is where masters and apprentices, this is where you're called usually to an apprentice. And it's interesting that they completely lost over all of that with Anakin and Ahsoka, but that's kind of beside the point here. But anything about Barris and Luminara you may have gathered? I mean, their interaction was fairly brief here.
Well, I mean, if I'm thinking about this interaction and I'm also comparing it to the Clone Wars, and you do get a taste of that in this story too, but
Right.
you can tell that Luminara really, like what you were saying a second ago about Barris is a good Padawan, you can tell that Luminara also relies on Barris too.
Absolutely.
Like, Barris is doing a lot to help Luminara out. So that does feel like sort of like a two-way relationship in that way, because I wonder, like, how much like in terms of like especially in terms of the planning of that mission, it seemed like Barris did a lot of that herself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was kind of her task to do it in the first place, which was interesting. Because I'm like, Luminara, what are you doing then? Like, what's your aspect? And maybe there were all of the other things that she needed to take care of. There were a lot of other logistical whatevers, and that was the part that she needed Barris for. But also, I think playing to Barris's strengths. And I think one thing that was maybe intentional, and maybe I might be reading more into this than what it is, giving Barris a task, because I think Barris even said that this is kind of what happened. By giving Barris that task and letting her hyper focus on that analytical side of solving a problem, distracted her a little bit from that. She was able to reconcile how she helps. She's not being asked to fight by Luminara. She's being asked to solve a problem to help the Republic.
Yeah. And that's what it says, is it's an intellectual type of situation for her.
Exactly. So I don't know if that was intentional by Luminara or not, or if Barris just kind of reconciled it that way. Which one do you think it was, or do you think it might be a little bit of both?
I did kind of get the impression that it was Barris reconciling it in whatever way she needed to be able to do it, because I do kind of feel like, although maybe what I'm about to say is a little bit unfair to Luminara, I was about to say that, like, I feel like if Luminara really was like that honed in on what Barris needs, then she wouldn't have sent her out there in the first place. But then on the other hand, I'm like, maybe that's a little unfair, because I don't think Luminara really had a choice either.
Well, in a Padawan's place is with their master, right? And at some point it was bound to happen. It may have been, Luminara may have wanted it to be later, but her hands were kind of forced because they didn't have anybody else to do the mission.
Yeah, so okay, if I'm being fair to Luminara, then I'm gonna say I do still feel like it was Barris kind of reconciling it, but
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, Luminara probably didn't have a choice.
Okay. All right. So we talked. Maybe we'll kind of start to wrap up a little bit by bringing this back over to Ahsoka and the relationship that Ahsoka and Barris eventually had. Of course, they don't meet in this story. But again, like we talked about at the top of the show, this is a story where Barris, again, is looking for someone to connect with. And she actually does connect with Ahsoka. They become quite good friends. I mean, they're probably the closest to best friends that we have between two Padawans that I think we saw in the Clone Wars. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, when Ahsoka's in trouble, she calls Barris.
Right.
So, I mean, that's as much of a best friend as I can think of, as, the person that you call when you're in a crisis.
Absolutely. And which makes it all the more, oh gosh, I remember when I was watching these episodes for the very first time where Barris betrays Ahsoka, and you start to feel like something is just wrong here. And it felt so out of nowhere for me for whatever reason. Like, it just didn't feel right. Like, how could she just turn on her like this after, so many years of working together, being great friends, trusting one another? Like, things have gotten that bad for Barris. But I think where this story helps fill that need is that you start to see just how early it started for Barris and why it could get that far, down that path when it starts so early on, with just the first battle of Geonosis. But do you think that with Ahsoka, though, with the history that they had, with the fallout that they had, because Ahsoka in the book actually has some comments in the Ahsoka novel, actually has some thoughts about Barris. I think she's talking to Bail Organa, if I recall. And she kind of has a lot of sympathy for Barris. I mean, she clearly acknowledges that Barris should not have done what she did. She should not have blown up the temple. but she kind of fundamentally understands where she's coming from, right? She finally gets it that this is not the way that we should be. The Jedi have lost their way. We have not taken a step back to to absolve ourselves of our sins effectively and try to do something different because we just keep doubling down on what it is. So I think at some point she finally gets there with Barriss. But do you think there was, oh man, how much would you like to see Barriss and Ahsoka reconnect at some point?
I mean, that would be tough because I mean, there's a lot there. Like, I do think it's, I mean, good on Ahsoka for being able to look at that situation and be like, yeah, like that was horrible. I definitely was done wrong in that situation, but I do see where Barris was coming from. Like, for her to be able to do that at all is big because I mean, she ended up leaving the order because of the chain of events that Barris set into motion.
Right.
But like for them to actually like reconcile their differences, I mean, that seems like, I mean, because I guess I wouldn't be able to see Barris coming back from where she ended up. Because, I mean, her hatred of the Jedi was strong at the end. And she also, in a way, reminds me of Dooku, because the hatred is strong, but it started off with being something that you can kind of see where she's coming from.
Right.
And I feel like in those cases, when they kind of do have a point, those are the characters that it kind of seems like they have a hard time turning back because they weren't 100% incorrect at the start.
Absolutely. Yeah, and
So,
I think with Ahsoka, I would just like to see that. I don't know. I would love for Barriss to have the opportunity to apologize to Ahsoka for betraying her, even though this was really just the spark against the Jedi, and Ahsoka just happened to be the one that she was the conduit that she could make it all happen through. She was really just an unfortunate pawn, unfortunately, right? And it's just really unfortunate. I wish there was some way that she would be able to come back and actually express her remorse to Ahsoka. Maybe not to what she did in general, but at least to Ahsoka that she did it to her.
yeah, although there's a conversation between the two of them from season 2 of the Clone Wars that I'm kind of thinking back on, which is they're sitting there like in the cafeteria or something eating lunch and they're talking and um Ahsoka's like, you know, I know we're supposed to be enjoying the peace, but as a Jedi, I don't think I know how to do that. And Barriss is like, well, we're not supposed to be warriors, and that kind of leads to a little bit of a back and forth where are the Jedi warriors or not? And you get the sense that the two of them are on differing opinions on this issue.
Yeah.
And so I do wonder if maybe that's part of what fed into Barriss turning on Ahsoka, is feeling like Ahsoka was part of the warmongering. But then I also hope that maybe with time, Barriss could look at that situation and recognize that Ahsoka didn't want to be part of the warmongering. She just didn't know anything different.
Right. And I mean, you're a product of your master as well. And when you have one of the most warrior based Jedi that, possibly ever was, right? I mean, one of the fiercest warriors, competent warriors, but also always kind of spoiling for a fight in many ways.
Yeah.
Actually, it was really interesting that Barriss actually held her own against Anakin pretty well. Maybe he was holding back or something, but she seemed to hold her own pretty well in the fights in the Wrong Jedi. But that's a good point, though. I mean, because, yeah, Ahsoka is very aggressive, right? And is very combat oriented for a lot of times because she has to be because they're out on the front lines most of the time. And she's very skilled, right? But very different perspective. So, again, it makes sense that Barriss would just lump her in with them, even though there might have been some conflict with her wanting to do that, but I don't know. I always want to believe the best, even in some bad people. Sometimes I kind of want them to just accept that they did something wrong. I mean, and go
Yeah.
serve your time and do whatever. We don't have to be friends or anything after we're done, but at least acknowledge you did something wrong,
Yeah.
so we can put that to rest, and then we can walk away from each other and be fine, right? But acknowledge you did something wrong. Don't keep lying to yourself and don't lie to me about it.
Yeah, we just want an apology.
That's really all I want. I just want someone to take accountability for their actions, damn it. Please. Can we have this, please? Can we just have people be accountable and like apologize at the end of the day?
I mean, it would be cool if we ever saw an apology from Barriss, or maybe even like a flashback or something. I mean, it would be cool to see, and I would definitely appreciate it because, you would think that if Barriss really is, as empathetic and compassionate as she's portrayed in this story, you would think that eventually she would come around and kind of see the true Ahsoka that we see, you know?
Exactly. I mean, Ahsoka really is, I think, the epitome of what the Jedi aspire to be in so many different ways. Now, the Ahsoka we see come the Ahsoka series, of course, is a very different Jedi as well, or Jedi, not Jedi, what do you want to call her? And I think it's really interesting there because you have the New Republic who doesn't want to fight. They're resisting that. We've seen this in some of the books like Bloodline and others. And we think we're seeing that here as well, what we've seen in the trailer, where the New Republic is like, look, we're dismantling everything. We can't fight. We saw this in Mandalorian as well. You know, this is what the galaxy wants. We need to be peaceful. We need to show that we are not just another war machine. We are not just another empire that's trying to take over. Now they're struggling with that. But then you have groups of people like Leia who and Hera and Ahsoka, I think, that see that there are other things at play. Carson Teva, right? There are other groups at play, you know, in the shadows that are threatening your republic, and you don't know it yet because you won't open your eyes to it, and you're so consumed with wanting to do the right thing that it's okay to have a military presence and to take those threats seriously. It doesn't mean you're going to become an empire, and is really the galaxy's ego and confidence so fractured even so many years later that it's still going to be, you know, problematic. But I'm also curious if that's, again, Albert and I have talked about this too, of that relationship between Ahsoka and Sabine suffering perhaps because of something similar of overly assertive going after Thrawn versus we need to take care of our family member Ezra. Of course, Ahsoka and Ezra really didn't have a whole lot there except for being rescued, right? Well, I guess they had way more than her and Sabine, I guess, but still, they weren't like best friends or anything like that. But I don't know. I hope to see more of that though in the series.
Yeah, I mean, I that also raises questions for me of like, what did Sabine really expect Ahsoka to do? I mean,
Right.
I don't know. I guess that's a whole nother can of worms, but we'll probably find out
Right.
soon.
Tune into the final hype show. We go
Yeah.
into all that. Yeah, we're gonna do a Thrawn show and a final hype show, so a lot of good stuff coming there. But any other thoughts on this story, or where it, you know, kind of the other things that have happened way later that might come back into it? Any other thoughts on the story in general?
I do wonder if, you know, if even if we don't really see, even if we don't see Barriss again, I wonder if we're going to see Ahsoka in the Ahsoka series kind of coming around to a little bit of what Barriss was saying, because the one question that this story had me asking was, what is actually a Jedi's duty? And something that I've been feeling like we might see in the Ahsoka series is Ahsoka trying to come to terms with, you know, instead of I am no Jedi, having to come to terms with, well, what is a Jedi really? And trying to kind of like redefine that for herself. And so I wonder if Barriss's perspective on like nonviolence versus, you know, not being a warrior and kind of like different ways of going about things, I wonder if that's going to come up at all.
I love that idea, and I hope it does. I don't know how it would maybe work into it. I don't know how a Barriss would work into the Ahsoka series kind of period, either showing up or even just working into a conversation. It seems like a lot to try to get to. But
Yeah.
Dave Filoni is always, everything's kind of a possibility. There's always sometimes at least the idea of a comment that definitely references that, but doesn't necessarily name drop anything. But you could definitely make some connections. So I'm really hoping we get something along those lines that reference some of these other experiences. But I'm with you. I really hope that Ahsoka has to answer the question, even if individually just for her, what it means to be a Jedi. What is it that she is expecting to get out of it? What is her purpose? What is her place, right, in the galaxy as not a Jedi, but still adhering to the Jedi values, right? And it's okay to adhere to the values, but not completely keep everything at arm's length, right, with like Luke Skywalker and so on and so forth. So I really love that idea. I hope they do explore that specifically and finally give us that answer. And if it's the whole Wayseeker idea or something around that kind of concept, I'm fine with that. I don't know if Ahsoka strictly adheres to the Wayseeker mentality as much as, you know, maybe I think Albert kind of believes that that's probably as close as she gets. And for lack of a better term, he's probably right in that respect, that she probably does align more closely with that than any other term that we have today. But I'd really like for her that to be clarified about who is Ahsoka Tano at this point. And we understand her values, but where does she actually align? And I would love for her to come back and say that she is a Jedi at the very end of the day and be able to reference some of these things and taking the learnings that she had with Barriss and with other, other groups along the way, Ahsoka and Ezra and Sabine and the others, to really bring those together and help her kind of rebuild who she is rather than this person who's always on her own and just completely isolating herself really from every relationship that's out there, and which is what we saw in Rebels and we have seen here as well, right? Even with Luke.
Yeah, and I feel like I really suspect that that is the direction that it's going to go in, is her trying to come to terms with, is there a way that I can be a Jedi without, all of this emotional stuff that I have tied up in that, Barriss being one of those things, So, and yeah, I mean, especially in terms of her just being on her own, like you were saying, like hopefully she can kind of come to terms with being a Jedi and also understanding that it's okay to rely on people in that way too.
Yeah, that's a great point. And Jeff just highlights some of the chat here. He says, I feel like Baylan Skoll might name drop Barriss on Ahsoka during their confrontation. Not sure we get anything direct with her, though, because thematically you can explore the Barriss stuff in regards to Ahsoka without her actually popping up or anything, which I totally agree with. I think
Yeah. Same.
We're all nerds for the hint of something, and just a name drop or a suggestion where it's like, aha, that's what they're talking about. We can say we understand that. That's exciting, right? I mean, those are the things we'd love to see, hear, experience, and be able to dissect later on about what the influences were there. But I really like the story. I'm glad you recommended this. And again, I went the one right after this, of course, was the Asajj Ventress story, Worthless, which I enjoyed that one too, even though it was kind of, again, these stories are just little snippets. I mean, they take place over the course of anywhere from like 15 minutes to a few hours to a few days. They're usually very concise. They're very very specific in what they're trying to do. And are they giving you anything that's really monumental about the character? No. But if you like the character moments, if you like the small details of characters and their motivations and where they're at in a given place and given time, especially in these really critical moments, several of these really do give you something like that. So if that's your jam, really do encourage y'all to go pick up this book, Jedi, Stories of Jedi and Sith. This is pretty good. I'm pleasantly impressed with this book, but this is a great story. Thank you for recommending it.
I'm glad that it ended up being a good rec. So, and since you like Red Blade so far, I might be right about 2 in a row.
You might be. Yeah, you're very, you're on in the industry, we call that a streak.
Because I figured you would like Red Blade, and so far I've been right, so.
Yeah, well, and it's exciting. So we got the preview copy for The Return of the Jedi from a certain point of view, right? And those stories, they're a bit hit and miss. Some of them are really hilarious and really great, and again, really good moments. And maybe I'm just warming up to this type of material in general, where it's okay you don't have to need a whole book or a whole big developing story and everything else. It's okay to have these moments, and maybe I'm just getting warmed up with these. But we just got that pre-read, so hopefully we will get that on Jedi Novel Archive here pretty soon, I guess, when the embargo lifts.
Yeah,
I guess I should go read. I should go read when the embargo lifts.
Yeah, I'm excited to read those though, because I really enjoyed the last 2. And it's like you were saying, like some of it is up to personal taste. Some of them are going to speak to you. Some of them won't. But either way, I mean, there's a lot of good stuff with the short stories to get into and different kinds of characters and concepts to explore. So I'm looking forward to getting into that one too.
Well, you made a believer out of me. And I like that we're getting some of these authors that I'm less familiar with, at least less familiar with in the Star Wars space. And they're getting this time to shine. And I listened to the audiobook, which of course is narrated by the voice actress that does Barriss Offee, which was kind of cool to be able to have that as well. So that was really neat. But
that is cool.
All right.
I might have to listen to that.
Well, and the Asajj one was done by, I wish I could remember all of these folks' name. I'm really terrible with names, but the Asajj Ventress actress is the one who did the Asajj one too, which is just so cool. I just love her voice. It's so great.
Yeah, that's like, I bet that's very immersive to hear the character's actual voice.
It really is, especially Well, less with the bear story, but with the Asajj, there's a little bit of it's not as subtle of a difference. There's a little more contrast of the narrator voice, and then you get the really, silky,
The Asajj voice, yeah.
sultry, seductive Asajj. But I mean, her voice is very much like that, her real voice. But when she goes into the character, it's just got that extra syrup in it. It's just extra gooey. It's great. I just
That's
absolutely
awesome.
love it.
I love that.
Yeah, well, Lauren, thank you so much. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. I enjoyed it. I'm glad that you like short stories now. So I've accomplished something.
You have. Fantastic job. It only took 45 years of my life to get here, and it took you to do it. So I certainly appreciate that. Appreciate all of our Patreon members, of course. Everyone who came out for the live stream, we do appreciate it. If you are listening to this and you would like to watch us on the podcast, we post all these out to Patreon, but they do start at the $5 tier and up. So if you're at the We Are the Republic $2 tier and you're curious about the videos, we do encourage you to go check that out if you'd like to upgrade. If you're cool with audio and that's your jam and you're on a lot of windshield time, that makes sense. Thank you. We appreciate the support either way. We really do enjoy having all of you there. We hope you're enjoying this content. Lauren, what do you have? What is next for Jedi Novel Archive before we wrap up here?
So I was saying, I have a couple of weeks in between where I don't have anything new. So I have a couple of things that I'm trying to decide what I'm going to do next. So right now that is to be determined, but it's definitely not a bad problem to have because I'm about to be getting ready to actually do some stuff that I've been wanting to do for a while. So that remains to be seen.
Republic Commando.
Dude, that has been on my coffee table for I cannot tell you how long. Because everybody was saying, read Republic Commando. And I was like, I'm going to read it. And then High Republic Phase 2 started. And I have not read it yet. So that is one of the things I've been wanting to get to. So
yeah. And
I got to decide soon, though.
And we're about to get swarmed, too, with a bunch of other books. So it's a good problem to have. Like you said, we've got lots of content to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, so again, if you, on Sunday, we're going to do the Way Station. We will try to do a Patreon show, but schedules have been really tough lately and a lot of outside of the show type of activities going on. So we'll try that, but we will definitely get the Way Station out. We'll give you guys the schedule as soon as we have it, so we'll have that out by Saturday. Lots of great news that we're going to have, so please do tune in. That'll be broadcast everywhere on YouTube. CantinaCast.com/YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to the channel. Like the videos if you do like them. We do appreciate you guys doing that, and it means a lot to us when y'all go out there and you join us on the live stream as well if you're able. So I think that's about it. So any parting words, Lauren?
Stay cool, y'all.
Dude, let me tell you. It's been 102 here the last few days, so yeah, please do. Yeah, stay safe, everyone. We will talk to you here in a couple of days.
You're still listening? Wow, that's amazing. Well, I'm here to give you the disclaimer. Normally we do a big, long, drawn-out disclaimer thing saying what's what and who's what and all that other stuff, but I think you guys kind of know that Lucasfilm and Disney have no affiliation with us at all, and we have none with them. We talk about Star Wars, which is their property and all that other good, fun stuff, but I think you can tell which is our stuff and which is their stuff. If you can't, well, then send a lawyer to send an email to me, and I'll be glad to chat with them. Other than that, you know what's what, so that's your disclaimer.